So today, Microsoft announced that it had sold off its feature phone brands, software, and services, but it will continue to develop Windows 10 Mobile and support Lumia devices. Joining us to talk about what this means is Brad Sams from TWiT.com and Petri.com. Welcome back to the show, Brad.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always fun to be back. It's always fun to be here.
So you wrote today that Microsoft has closed the book on its Nokia assets, ending in what you call disaster. Many will agree. So what parts did they sell and who did they sell it to?
All right, so let's just kind of take a step back here. A couple years ago, Microsoft bought Nokia mobile assets for over $7 billion. And through that time, they've kind of whittled things down. They wrote off they did write off everything. And then today we learned that they sold their feature phone business to a subsidiary of Foxconn called FIH Mobile, and along with a new group called HMD Global, which is based out of Finland, basically right next door to where the old Nokia plant is. And Microsoft said, hey, you know what? We got $350 million for this stuff. And they offloaded their feature phone business to these two new companies to start selling them under the Nokia brand. And also at the same time, Nokia announced a new exclusive license to, I believe it's this HMD group, to now that they can actually build tablets and smartphones using the Nokia brand name. So it was many things. Microsoft dumped feature phones, and now Nokia brand has essentially become the Westinghouse of everything again. It's just a licensable name. Now, it's not actually the actual Nokia we're used to, but we'll see how this plays out.
So when they say they're going to support Lumia phones, what do you think they mean by that?
Yeah, so this is really what people were kind of freaking out today. The $350 million, to be honest, was just kind of like, here's some money, and hey, we at least made some money on this terrible acquisition. But the way they worded everything, that they're going to continue to support existing products and build out Windows 10 Mobile. I had heard several times, and other people have heard this as well, that the Lumia brand is actually going to cease to exist for Microsoft. What that means, it's pretty much face value. They're not going to build Lumia phones anymore. I don't think that means they're not going to build Windows phones in the semi-distant future. But what they're actually doing is killing off that brand name, because I think there's a negative connotation with it. Lumias haven't sold well. Lumias haven't performed well. So why should they keep propping up this asset that they bought that's no longer really an asset? So I think we're done with the Lumia lines, and, pour one out for it, and we'll see what the next chapter holds for Microsoft, which, from what I'm hearing from internal sources, we won't see anything from Microsoft of significance until next year.
So I know part of this, too, is kind of this involvement of Android devices into the whole formula, I suppose. How is that happening?
So I have a lot of really interesting thoughts about Microsoft and Android, but we won't go too far down there. But essentially, we're going to see Nokia branded Android phones. Now, this isn't completely new. Actually, under the Microsoft Windows umbrella, Nokia did release a couple Android phones, but they were really stripped down, and they only had Microsoft-related apps. So essentially what I think we're going to see here, and I honestly hope it doesn't go too far down this route, is we're going to see a new crop of Nokia Android phones. But I don't know if they're going to be the super premium phones that everybody's kind of wanting, because it's not, remember, it's not actually Nokia that's building them. It's this new company that has licensed the name. And so I don't know how this is going to work out for them. You know much better than I do about how saturated the Android market is. Look at BlackBerry. They're a perfect example. They pivoted to Android, and I don't think it's working out too well for them. So I can't imagine that just because it has Nokia and Android, they're going to essentially swamp the market here.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Android fans who have ever said, oh, why isn't there a Nokia, line on Android, is pining for kind of the design of the premium Nokia devices that are out there. So if it's not going to be of that caliber, and it's not going to kind of follow the traditional design language, which is what people are kind of would hope for, I would imagine, then they might have a challenge on their hands.
Yeah, they really want that. I mean, Nokia in the Windows Phone world made a name for themselves early on for having exceptional cameras. Remember, they had a 41 megapixel camera in a phone, and they were dishing out 20 megapixels. They called it Pure View. I don't think we're going to see that in this new Nokia. I really don't, because they don't have the IP to support that. Mm-hmm. So I don't see how they're going to differentiate themselves. Potentially maybe go back to the polycarbonate, which, let's not kid ourselves here, that's plastic. High-end phones, I don't know. It's a really tough nut to crack to break into the Android space, much like it is in the mobile phone space. This is why Microsoft essentially has reeled everything back. They were losing, I think last year, 13 cents for every phone they sold. Like, that's not a sustainable business model.
Not at all.
So, I mean, what happened to Windows 10 Mobile last January, I guess January 2015? I mean, that was the big thing. Like, that was their big, when they announced Windows 10, that was the thing. It was going to be across all your devices, your phone. And I mean, what happened?
So that's a really good question. Here's the thing. The Windows 10 mobile build that is shipping right now is not great. It works. It's fine. It's not. There's nothing special about Windows Phone. That's the problem. And people who have an iPhone are very dedicated to it. You know why? Because it works. It doesn't have to be overly flashy. It's got good hardware and it works. Same with Android. People like Android because it's customizable. So if you want something that's very plain Jane and just gets the job done, you want an iPhone. If you want something that's customizable and works, you get an Android. Where does that leave Windows Phone? Windows Phone tried to live in the middle ground where you had locked hardware. Microsoft initially said, if you're going to build a Windows Phone, it has to be in certain requirements. And then this is where I think they went wrong. They said, you're going to get updates. They said, that's going to be the difference. You're going to have size options and updates. That's something you don't get with Android, guaranteed, unless you buy Nexus. And iPhone is locked into a size. But here's the problem. If you bought a Windows Phone 7 device, it was not upgradable to Windows Phone 8. And guess what? About 50% of the people using a Windows Phone 8 device can't get a Windows Phone 10 upgrade. I have 2 Lumia icons at my house that Microsoft initially said, hey, we're not going to upgrade this. And these were the flagship devices on Verizon. They said, we're not going to do it. Now, they did reel that back a little bit and say, okay, we'll consider it. But that's not the message you send. So the promise of updates never materialized because they burned a lot of the fanboys. And then you have the app situation, which was terrible. And now it's somewhere slightly less than terrible. I put it into like the palatable stage because you have third-party alternatives for everything. But when you combine these things, it's not a very compelling argument why choose Windows Phone. You got to remember that people associate Windows, for the most part, and I don't put this lightly, like negatively. They're used to the Windows XP or Microsoft forcing them to do things or viruses. And Microsoft is having a challenge getting over that hump. Now, they've made some ground, but when you pile all these things together, I've asked this Microsoft many times. They said, why Windows Phone? And they said, well, it's great in the enterprise. But you know what? You know what enterprise customers want? Enterprise users want an iPhone. They don't want a Windows Phone. And the days of when the IT pro made all the decisions for the company, that doesn't exist anymore. It's more user-driven, and the users aren't wanting Windows Phone, so they didn't get business adoption. They screwed over people with updates. Their app situation wasn't great. If anybody can tell me why to buy a Windows Phone today, I would love to hear it, but there's no compelling argument against a Windows Phone or an iOS and Android device. It just doesn't exist.
So what about the Surface? The Surface is kind of the product that is, people like it. I mean, they're big fans. Yeah. And then we hear of this rumored Surface phone. Is that something that you know anything about?
So yeah, so we've heard some tinklings around. Microsoft Surface division is very locked down. Big credit to them. They're very good at keeping secrets inside this division, mostly until things get closer to launch, like most companies. So what we're hearing from the Surface phone, it's a Panos design device. So he's the father, the godfather, whatever you want to call him, of the Surface products. He's leading them up, and he's supposedly designing this device. Now, we have asked myself, Paul Thurrott, Mary Jo Foley, everybody has asked many times. They said, what could be in a quote unquote Surface phone that's really going to make people buy it? Because it's not the software, it's not the apps. What can Microsoft do? And so I honestly hope that they go crazy with it. I hope that they put an Intel chip in there, but that's been stunted since Intel killed off some of their mobile chips, because they're not making any money here. But we're hearing that these devices should show up sometime in the spring of 2017, which, again, if you're a Windows Phone fan, if Microsoft is pretty much saying, hey, we're not going to build out any new premium Lumias this year, you're going to have to wait until next year. It's a big waiting game, and people don't like to wait. And so you've got to use a 950 for at least a year. And if you're on Verizon, this doesn't work on it, so good luck with that. And that's 80 million people in the US who can't buy a Windows Phone or a decent Windows Phone. So again, we're in this waiting cycle with Windows Phone for a device that may or may not blow our minds, with features that we haven't figured out that would actually help a device sell, other than potentially running an Intel chip. But even that's not assured anymore. So look for that in the spring of 2017 and try to get in the mindset of Microsoft. What can they do that's actually going to sell a device? And don't forget, people online were saying, you know what, the first Surface phone is going to be a magnificent device. Let's talk about the first Surface that actually came out was Surface RT. Then we had RT2. Both RT was a disaster. RT2 was not great. It wasn't until the third iteration that we actually got a usable device. So I hope we don't see this with the Surface phone either, because then we're looking 2019 before we get a really great Windows phone. And I'm eagerly awaiting all the people who are going to harass me through email and saying, Brad, you're so negative on Windows Phone. But it's the honest truth. It really, really is. Microsoft completely missed this segment, and they are struggling to make any presence known other than delivering excellent apps for iOS and Android.
So I agree with you on the apps. Like, they're fantastic. I think that I'm a huge fan of Satya Nadella. Like, I think he's really smart. And, you know, you hear a lot of inklings of, like, you know, the era of apps is over. Like, it's bots. It's, you know, Google announced today, like, there's apps that you don't really even have to install. Like, what if he sees further into the future than we do, and that apps are really something that is going away? Do you think that might be true?
So I'm a big fan of Nadella. I think he has done an exceptional job, and I firmly believe that he never would have bought these Nokia assets based on his maneuvers with the company and just his mentality. But I think Nadella does have very good insight. I mean, he started up Azure inside of Microsoft. He was a big proponent of the cloud platform, and that was a big bet. That's probably one of the reasons why he's CEO. And he was pushing these bots. I'm not quite sold on the bot mentality yet, and we'll see how that materializes. But what I do believe in is that these virtualized apps that will, very similar to what Google announced today, Microsoft has a product called AppV that allows you to virtualize apps. I think this is a bigger thing coming down the pipe than anything else. Because if you can run these apps in the cloud, much like what Google showed today, you don't need a powerful PC anymore. All you need is just a screen and a keyboard, and everything else is up in the cloud, and it comes down to your machine. So I think it's one of those things that you see multiple companies doing. You're like, yeah, they all see where this is going, but the problem is Microsoft doesn't have a mobile play yet to actually execute upon that strategy. Google does. Google has hundreds of, or probably in the billions of devices, I would imagine, or if not, getting close to it, out in the world running their OS. Microsoft doesn't have that yet. So it's going to be interesting to see how these web apps or these virtualized apps that give you just what you need through a browser actually materialize in the mobile space for both companies.
Well, Brad, thank you so much for joining us. If anyone out there wants to criticize anyone for their negative attitude toward Microsoft, please do so. Brad is at BD Sams on Twitter. I'm just kidding. It's wonderful to have someone that really knows the knowledge, uses the products, is inside, really asking the questions of Microsoft. And so thank you so much, Brad. Where is the best place for people to follow your work online?
You know what? The best place to find me is on Twitter. I'm probably overly active. Just hit me up on Twitter at BD Sams, and I'll get back to you.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.